So there are still some people joining, which is great. However, we will start now. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I am Daniela Requena. I am a forest monitoring scientist at the German Geosciences Research Center and also one of the coordinators of the GFOI Research and Development Component. Today, I'm excited to welcome you to this GFOI R&D Exchange on uncertainty quantification and reporting in forest monitoring. This session will be facilitated by Javier Gamarra and Chad Babcock, who are co-leading the R&D theme on uncertainty assessments within the R&D component. But before we start today's event, I would like to introduce the R&D exchanges, particularly for those that are joining for the first time. So these exchanges are a series of online events held every 2 or every 3 months, designed to foster discussion on evolving forest monitoring methods and their applications in natural forest monitoring systems. It serves as a dynamic platform for interactions between the GFOI community and the forest monitoring research community. And there are a few topics that have been addressed previously. This is not the first R&D exchange that we have. We have already held one on forest disturbance alerts, another one on tropical wetland monitoring, and the last one on forest degradation monitoring. Right now, we are also looking to expand the presentations and the examples that we showcase. So if you're interested in presenting your experience using new methods, data sets, or tools in these types of events, please contact the GFOI office. And I am leaving the contact details in the slide here. And before we move into the R&D topic of the day, I would like to reintroduce the audience to the criteria by which the GFOI aims to communicate research efforts. For this purpose, the GFOI uses the CALM framework, which is a criteria for consistently assessing the levels of maturity of datasets and methods. And it is, you can find it in the link that you can see on the slide. And also it consists basically on 3 phases and 9 corresponding levels. It aims to describe particular methodological efforts into their current phase of maturity, ranging from research to pre-operational and also operational approaches. R&D exchanges usually focus on research and pre-operational examples, and when possible, we also like to showcase examples that are embedded within national forest monitoring systems. With this in mind, I would like to move forward to today's agenda. For today, we have 3 presentations that will range from research level to pre-operational levels, and this is also preceded by an overview presentation on the importance of uncertainties in forest monitoring. You can see all of the presentations here, and also there will be some opportunities for interaction between the presenters and the audience. The agenda will consist of short presentations on evolving research in the fields of uncertainty assessment. And to help stimulate that discussion, that is why we will have 2 separate polls, one at the end of, well, towards the beginning of this session and one towards the end. The exchange will end with a live demo on a new tool set that can aid in using Monte Carlo approaches for reporting applications. I encourage you to leave your questions in the Q&A chat box within the Zoom environment, which will be monitored by the presenters. They can answer questions as we move through the exchange, but we will also save other questions for the dedicated discussion time after the presentations. Just a note that this meeting will be recorded and it will be made available alongside the presentation and other materials online in the coming days. So, to start the event, we have prepared 3 questions for the audience. So please get out your cell phones as we will show a QR code in the next slide. Alternatively, you can also use the coding which will be provided in the next slides. So here, here you can see the QR code and also you can go into slido.com and enter the following number.
Sorry, Daniela.
Yes.
There is no slides share. I don't know if I cannot see it.
I see your slides.
I think, yes, if the slides are not showing, please comment in the chat. Otherwise, we can move on with the first question. Yes, I see that they're there. Sounds great. So then let's move to the first question. So the first question relates to how you as an audience relate to the topic that we will be discussing today. Just to gauge the level of experience or familiarity that you have with uncertainty quantification and reporting in the forest and land monitoring sector. We can see that there are some ranging levels of familiarity. There's quite a few that are experienced, and the majority is somewhat familiar with the topic. So we hope that today's presentations can provide you more information, and also provide you more information from the basics to also a little bit more advanced analysis that we will show during the exchange. I will move on to the second question, which is a little bit more abstract, and I please encourage the audience to not cut back and answer as honestly as possible about what comes to mind when you hear uncertainty quantification. I see that there's estimates, standard errors of means, accuracy, limits, variability. I do not see frustration, which is great. But I do see complexity, pain. I saw that. So we can see that we all relate to this topic in very different ways. There's also different different answers, such as assumptions, trustable, confidence, and we hope that Javier's presentation and also Robert's presentation will give a little bit more, a broader overview of how they perceive this topic. Last but not least, this is also a broad question, and the question is the following: why do you think it's important to quantify and communicate uncertainty in forest and land monitoring? We will discuss this through the events, and we will also keep this question open so that you can introduce your answers during the event. If we have time, we will also show these answers at the end of the presentation. Also, if your perception changes during this exchange, then feel free to come back to this question and answer it again. And I see that there's already quite some answers here, which is great. But I would like to suggest that we move on with the agenda and to start with the first presentation. So it's first and foremost my pleasure to introduce Javier García Pérez Gamarra. Javier is a forestry officer at FAO and also one of the co-leads of the R&D theme on uncertainty assessment. Javier will provide an overview on the importance of uncertainties in forest monitoring, which is very related to the last question that we did. So Javier, the floor is yours. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Daniela. Let me try to see whether I can find my screen. I think it's that one. Sorry. Okay. Oops. Now I lost it. Okay. Okay. So thank you, Daniela, and thank you all of you that are here right now. My presentation is basically a very short introduction, hopefully, about uncertainty in general, about the concept of uncertainty, and how should we, those people that are particularly working on forest inventories, on the estimation of emission reductions, how should we look at it? Wait. Sorry. Usually uncertainty is often seen by many of us traditionally as something to hide. The world is uncertain and we feel uncomfortable As someone say, uncertainty raises doubt, and doubt raises fear. However, in forest emissions accounting, to me, in my view, uncertainty is not a weakness per se. It is actually the information that we need to understand how confident we are in estimating emissions and reporting emission reductions, we and the countries that have to report in them. So my point again is uncertainty is information, as I said before. Usually, traditionally, we are going to start. We are based. Decision makers, at least, they like to see one single estimate of whatever we are looking at. Let's say emissions, for example, and central estimate. However, we know we are more familiar nowadays that the central estimate is not enough. We are reporting also intervals, right? Particularly when it comes to international reporting. However, uncertainty, knowing those intervals actually opens a world of information, because in many occasions, just knowing the central estimate and the range of the interval dispersion around it, it gives you a lot of information about the probabilities of something happening. So uncertainty gives access again to probabilities, not just intervals. Instead of a single number, uncertainty is going to give us the distribution, as you can see on the right, and therefore the probability that emissions are, for example, higher or lower, or actually below the historical baseline if we are calculating emission reductions. So probabilities and not point estimates are the ones supporting eventually transparent and robust decisions. But before we look at the probabilities, we need to understand where uncertainty is coming from. It usually begins, in our case, let's say at the tree level, for example, and then propagates from the tree to the plot, then to the stratum, and then finally, let's say, to the national totals. Along the way, you are going to be accumulating different errors, measurement errors, model errors, sampling errors. So eventually understanding propagation is going to be essential before interpreting emissions or emission reductions. The inset here, the inset on the lower right corner is actually, you cannot see because it's very small, but it shows the main error sources, many of the main error sources that are usually associated when it comes to reporting from national forest inventories and remote sensing procedures. But anyway, as I say, all these components accumulate, and that means, again, that emissions are not single values, they are distributions. And that becomes essential when we are going to interpret emission reductions. Again, intervals alone are not enough for decision making. For example, a 90% interval, like in this case, is going to tell us the range of plausible values. But policymakers need actually very often the probability of meeting a certain target, or the probability that, for example, reductions may be overstated. That is why methods that are very explicit in calculating probabilities, like the Monte Carlo method that we will see later, are essential for decision making. In this context, we are going to have a continuous probability, but essentially probability thresholds allow consistent decisions and define eventually conservativeness, what we call conservativeness. Once we have the probabilities, we can establish clear and consistent rules. And if the probability, for example, if the probability that reductions are real is above a certain threshold, we could accept it. If not, we could apply a conservative adjustment. This is pretty much associated to the precautionary principle in practice. So that there is the connection that we are having between probability, decision making, and the conservativeness principle that is a must that everybody should do following the IPCC guidelines. Globally, actually, in terms of the international status of uncertainty reporting that we are facing today globally, uncertainty reporting is improving, but many countries still miss key components: activity data and emission factor uncertainties, sampling errors sometimes, or basically proper error propagation. This lack of uncertainties very often may weaken the comparability and confidence in reported emission reductions. Countries are facing obstacles and needs for reporting uncertainty. Countries need support in quantifying, propagating, and interpreting uncertainty. The obstacles are well known: limited training, missing data, and challenges combining multiple error sources. The way forward is still to help countries to produce rigorous uncertainty estimates and use them for transparent decision-making. So to conclude, I would say that uncertainty is, again, not something to fear or minimize. It protects environmental integrity. And when we quantify and communicate uncertainty, like Robert is going to show us now, reported emission reductions become more robust, more transparent, and more credible. Thank you very much. I think, Robert, the floor is yours. I'm going to stop sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Javier. That's great. Okay, let's see if I can get started. Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. I see that I already broke the rule and I did not use the right template for my slide. So hopefully everyone can still believe me when I talk. And I apologize, I actually am sick today. So if I have to stop and cough and clear my throat, please excuse that. So I'm at Oregon State University. Javier and Chad asked me to talk about a paper that I and a bunch of really smart people put together to talk about a framework to communicate uncertainty using Earth observation data. In general, this was not just limited to forests, but it is certainly relevant here. So I want to talk a little bit about the process we went through. I consider myself very much a practitioner, a learner about uncertainty. I'm not an expert like a lot of the co-authors I have in this paper, but it's been a really interesting journey. And the first thing that we realize is that uncertainty, in addition to having all the perceptions that we just saw in the Slido results, has a lot of definitions in different fields. But I like the sort of generalness of this definition here, which is that it's a deviation from this unachievable ideal of fully knowing a system. And that idea that we may never really know the absolute right answer is important and sort of touches on all the different fields that are relevant. We also see, when we look in the literature, discussions of different types of uncertainty. So there's the kind of uncertainty that we don't know because they're just random effects. And there's the type of uncertainty that we don't know because we just don't know about the system. There are parts of our knowledge that are incomplete. They have fancy names here, but the point is that both of these come into play. But the really key thing from my perspective and what we focus on with the framework is that, as Javier just showed, that uncertainty accumulates as we go through the production of knowledge. And so it can enter in many different places. It has different severities, it has these different properties, but really it's the places where it's introduced and what kinds of, essentially what flavors of uncertainty are showing up in our final products. That's really important to communicate. And when we're talking about our final products, we really are thinking about geospatial products, about maps. And they're special in a way, right? Because every time we make a map, we're every pixel that, if we're making it from a remote sensing product, every pixel has some uncertainty. So you can, if you think of that number, that even if you think of it as a probability, as Javier just said, every pixel has that number. The uncertainty is itself a map, really. You can think of it that way. And so if you and I have two different target products, and then each one of those has an uncertainty map associated with it, if we don't consider the same types of uncertainty when we're trying to characterize it, then those uncertainty maps are not going to agree. And if they don't agree, then it's possible and probably likely that our original maps will not agree. And in terms of utility for policymaking, in terms of trust, et cetera, we really want to understand, if our maps are not agreeing, why. And so that's one of the motivators for coming up with a framework that allows us to do that. So, and I also wanted to draw attention again to this notion with geospatial data that, we can build a map from observations, from good reference data, But then we typically are painting it across a landscape in a bunch of places where we just don't have direct knowledge. And so again, I just want to emphasize that those are places that we just, we have a good idea based on our model, but we don't actually know what's there. So as we approach this as a group, to come up with a framework, and this was in the context of the NASA carbon monitoring system, we had folks from a bunch of different disciplines, and each discipline has a very sort of strict line of definitions of certain words. So we had to relax those. So I encourage you to relax those if you can, as you're thinking through how we think about this this framework. We needed to find a way to sort of generalize how projects build knowledge and therefore introduce uncertainty, and then build the framework from there. I'm not going to read this list for you, but will be in the slides. It's also in the paper. So I encourage you, if you have any interest in how we were thinking of the definitions, and then also how we were trying to map our general definitions to sort of discipline-specific ones. There's a table in there for sure. And as I said, the range of folks considering this went from the very local scale forest biometricians all the way up to global climate modelers. And we were trying to come up with these generic ways to communicate the uncertainty. If the paper reference there is on the bottom if you want to take a look at that. So the first thing, and none of this is without controversy, and it took us many years to actually of discussion and some argument to come up with some of these. First thing was to say, is there a generalized workflow for all of our projects? And this is our first claim. And again, I won't take the time to walk through every part of this, but you notice there are some colored symbols in there, and those are the keys. So the basic notion is that we have models of the world that translate some level of predictors and observations into predictions. And so the predictions are the maps that we're making, but as we make those, we want to be able to communicate where in that process, that flow coming into it, the uncertainty arose. We also have uncertainty as we try to aggregate and summarize. So we'll come back to this. Why did that click? There we go. And then here's our framework. So this is a heuristic. It's just a very simple sort of almost a cartoon. And the key thing is that we have different columns there on the top of places where uncertainty can enter into a process. We talk about predictors, the models, the observations. We break those out into different subcomponents. I'll walk through a quick example here in a second. But I want to draw your attention to the bottom. So we've got different color codes, symbology codes, and this is really the key. As a developer, my role is to use something like this framework to communicate to my users what I considered and what I didn't consider when I was making my uncertainty estimates. And so for some kinds of workflow, certain things are not relevant. You leave those blank. Other ones are very relevant, and you've handled them entirely. So you color them in, and then you put a line around them. You said they're important, and we did something about them. The other two boxes are really important because those are saying there are parts of my uncertainty, either that I know I should have had, but I don't have a way to do it, or I only partly considered. And so Javier asked me to give an example that I hope would be relevant for folks. So if we think about how we reported on disturbance on forest loss in the past with pixel counting, we can just use this as a straw man. So we can think about imagery that went into some favorite change detection algorithm. That was our model. And we made a loss map. And we might have done accuracy interpretation from photo interpretation, but in essence, we didn't apply the accuracy matrices back to our maps. We just used them to report an overall uncertainty. But the maps that were actually used made essentially no effort to look at uncertainty. And so we could color code it this way. We could say, and this is part of a discussion too. This could start a discussion. Someone might argue with you about your decision. Hopefully this allows us to explicitly communicate what we're doing. But, we could have used different drivers. We could have used different algorithms, different ways of tuning the algorithms. We didn't consider the measurement error. We didn't consider spatial autocorrelation probably in our maps. All these things were important, but we just didn't consider them. So if we were communicating, it would be very clear to the user that the map is got a lot that they're relevant. Now let's go forward to what a lot of us do now with area-based estimation. Now in this case, we've made a map, so we can run through this cycle one more time. Now our loss map actually becomes an input. And we've got photo interpretations. We use area-based estimation to update that. And we have error-adjusted areas. And in this case, I would argue that because we've shifted entirely to sort of a design-based sample, the uncertainty in the drivers are actually not as relevant. And this is an argument that we could have if you want. But and even in the prediction uncertainty, the spatial autocorrelation, although it's a critical thing in the world, if in a strictly design-based approach shouldn't matter. But what is important is the sampling error. So we've accounted for that if we do a probability-based sample, but not in the measurements necessarily that go into the reference data. So we would color code it this way. We've handled the sampling error, but the measurement error in, say, our reference data is probably incomplete. So that's a notion of how we could use this to start a conversation about uncertainty. So take homes, uncertainty arises in different places. Spatial maps make claims that we just don't know about those areas. And regardless how you do it, whether you take our framework or not, it is really important to try and communicate what types of uncertainty you considered, and more importantly, which ones you did not. So thank you for your time. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you, Robert, and also thank you, Javier. I think both presentations gave a really great overview of how communicating uncertainty can be seen first from Javier's perspective as a policymaker and a decision maker, and then from Robert's perspective as a group of multidisciplinary scientists trying to communicate about the same topic. So thanks so much. Up next, I would like to introduce Chad Babcock, who is the other co-lead of the uncertainty theme within the R&D component. And Chad will be presenting on different statistical approaches for estimating forest carbon and also their uncertainties. So Chad, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Chad Babcock. I'm from the University of Minnesota in the United States. And today I'm going to talk about, the title of my presentation is on design-based, model-assisted, and model-based forest biomass estimation. So through the talk, I'm essentially going to lay out 3 different example ways essentially to estimate forest biomass in a region. And one's going to be from the design-based paradigm, and then the model assisted, which is also kind of in the design-based realm, and then we're going to look at a particular model-based estimation approach, and then we'll be able to compare how these work across a case study data set. So before I continue though, I would like to thank Surfor for allowing Natalia Magala, and then through her, me, access to some of the data from Peru that I'm going to use as an example in this study, or in this presentation. I do want to let everybody know that I think I've had this data set for about a week now, and so let's take any numbers or results or anything that I present here today as extremely preliminary. The point of showing this particular data set and these approaches is to be able to compare across these 3 different approaches, not necessarily to advocate for how much biomass or carbon is in the particular regions within Peru that I'm going to be showing. So we're just using it as an example data set to demonstrate the difference between the methods. We're not presenting new forest biomass numbers or anything like that for Peru officially here. So with that, I will continue to my first slide here. So if I click. There we go. Okay. So to start, I'm going to try to frame us all. So traditionally, we're trying to estimate forest biomass or forest carbon using traditional forest inventory approaches. And this all resides in the design-based realm of inference. So that process is usually we go out and we select field plot locations using some sort of probabilistic sampling design. So in the simplest case, and in the case of our example here, we're going to assume simple random sampling. So that just means we just go in and randomly pick plots within our map, and then we visit each one of those plots and try to measure the amount of carbon or biomass on the plot. And that usually involves measuring the diameter the trees, and then applying allometric equations to be able to estimate how much carbon or biomass is in each tree, and then we add those up. And then once we have that number, that estimate essentially for the plot, we're going to end up treating that essentially as a true value in the sense of how our estimators are working. So thinking back to what Robert Kennedy recently presented here, there is uncertainty associated with actually like the estimate we create for each plot using those allometric equations, but we are ignoring that here. So we're assuming that we have a true value at the plot level after we've applied our allometric equations and such. Which is a pretty common thing to do within forest inventory using design-based estimation. It's just kind of that's how far down the rabbit hole we're going to go with uncertainty for this particular example. So once we have the estimators set up and we have the sampling design set up and we've measured all the plots, then we can apply a design-based estimator for the mean and then for the standard error. And then those are the estimates we would report to anyone who needs to see them as far as accounting for carbon or biomass in the particular forest. The advantages of using this type of approach is that the estimators can be proven to be unbiased, which just means that if we do the sampling, if we randomly sample plots again, that many times, we're just as likely to overestimate the amount of biomass in the area as underestimate the amount of biomass. So that's what makes the estimator unbiased. And then also, we're pretty people tend to be fairly familiar with how to interpret the confidence intervals and the standard errors, as these approaches have been around for a very long time and have been used in forest inventory for quite a while. So the major disadvantages, though, is this is usually one of the more expensive ways to go in and actually inventory a forest. So it's very expensive to collect field data, especially at the intensities that we would need to be able to get an adequate estimate for a forest. It tends to be, it's usually quite difficult to estimate within subregions within our forest, within our area of interest. So thinking small area estimation, usually we run out of field samples within the particular areas we're trying to estimate for once they get small enough. So one way to hopefully help with the two disadvantages from the design-based approach is to find a way to incorporate remotely sensed information. So we could bring in LiDAR height metrics from airborne or spaceborne platforms. We could also look at optical remote sensing, maybe from the NASA Landsat missions or ESA's Sentinel-2 data. But also there's a lot of above ground biomass map products that are pre-made for the user based on remote sensing data that are publicly available now. So the two big examples are the European Space Agency's Climate Change Initiative biomass maps, and then also NASA has produced the JEDI biomass maps using their JEDI LiDAR sensor. Today we're going to be looking at the CCI biomass maps in our estimators. So how do we go about bringing this remote sensing data in to an estimator? So there's two particular approaches that we're going to look at here today. These are two general approaches. We can go by way of model-assisted estimation, which essentially we build a model. In our case, we're just going to build a simple linear regression model. And we use that assisting model to then relate the remote sensing data to the field observations we have, so the field plot data. And then we can go through and estimate biomass and the standard error using effectively design-based principles based on the sampling design we use to collect the plots. And then there's, in contrast to that, there's generally model-based estimation. Where we can use a very similar model as in model-assisted estimation to relate the remote sensing data to the field observations, and then we can use model-based principles to be able to estimate biomass and the standard error or the credible, at least confidence or credible intervals associated with the estimate. But these are all based on assumptions within the model we use to fit the data, which can be harder to verify and harder to accommodate violations of those assumptions, rather compared to using a model-assisted or design-based approach. So we have to be a lot more careful about the distribution of our errors within this model-based estimation framework, which makes it more challenging. All right, so a real quick look at model-assisted estimation. So if you can see my mouse, the equation here in the middle is our linear regression model. So we have an intercept and a slope term, and this little x here for us is the CCI biomass value at plot I, and then we can estimate how much forest biomass is there by essentially applying the fitted, getting the fitted values for this model, and then getting that estimate. And then we can make a prediction across the entire map. And then essentially with our estimator here, we are just summing, or we're taking the average of all the predictions over the area. And then we are bringing in a bias correction term to essentially account for, you can, so the true value minus the fitted value is just the residuals. So we're weighting this by the residuals within the area of interest to effectively bias correct the value from the predictions that we get. And then we can calculate a fairly standard design-based-esque standard error. And all of these are assuming a simple random sampling design. So if we have a more complex sampling design, these estimators can be adapted to account for that, the unequal inclusion probabilities and things like that. So we can quickly talk about a model-based approach. So the model-based approach I'm going to be showing today is it's often called a geostatistical model-based estimator or a spatial model-based estimator. I didn't actually show the equation for the linear regression model that's fit, but it's exactly the same as the one we're using in the model-assisted estimator, except that we have a special random effect in there that is going to try to account for the spatial autocorrelation in the residuals of the linear model. And we're doing this because we need to make sure that that our error terms are independent and identically distributed, and parsing out the spatially structured error component from the non-spatial error component helps us satisfy that assumption. All right, so here is our case study in Peru. So I simplified the names here so I don't slaughter them because this is my first attempt at digging into this data set, and I definitely am not a Spanish speaker, so I'm trying to be as, I guess, careful about that as possible. So, this is our general map of the Amazon region within Peru. So the entire area I'll refer to as the Amazon region, and then we'll make an estimate for the entire area. But I also want to make estimates within each of the strata. So I'm going to have a purple strata here, a green strata, and an orange strata. And then I also am going to make try to generate an estimate for the pink region in here. And we're going to try to incorporate the CCI map remote sensing data to be able to help us get estimates. So the field data that we're using is field plot data collected through Peru's National Forest Inventory. In total, there are 320 plots. So there's 320 little blue dots here across the Amazon. And in our purple strata, we're looking at 221 plots. In the green strata, we're looking at 32. And then in my orange strata, we got 67. And then in the pink strata, we don't have any plots at all. And the remote sensing data we're going to use, as I said, is the CCI biomass map. So we're going to look at 4 different estimators. So we're going to have a design-based estimator, which is only going to use the field data to make its estimate. We're going to look at a model-assisted, specifically a generalized regression estimator, which is what I showed before. And this is going to use the field and the remote sensing data, and then it uses a linear regression model as its assisted model. And then we're going to look at a spatial model-based estimator. So that's using the field and remote sensing data, but we're going to estimate error within that model-based paradigm. And then I also brought in what I'm calling a null spatial model-based estimator, which is effectively the same estimator as the spatial model-based estimator, except that I don't bring in any remote sensing data at all. So you can think of this as like a null model in kind of a regression kind of setting. what's nice is that we can then compare like what a model-based estimator that does not use any remote sensing data, how that compares to a design-based estimator that's also not using any remote sensing data. All right, and here's our big table of numbers. You can see that I got almost all the way through getting all these numbers punched out in the last week. But we can start in the Amazon region, which is the entire map. So remember, we have 320 plots. So we get a design-based estimate of around 218, and then we get a model-assisted estimate that's around 216. And then these are the standard errors here in parentheses. So we can see that the standard error does go down a little bit when we move into the model-assisted approach, but not that much. And then we can move over to our model-based approaches. So this is that null spatial model, which should be hopefully somewhat comparable to the design-based approach that's also not using the CCI map. And we see we get a value of 226, and we get an uncertainty measurement that is can be related to the standard error. We can see that uncertainty is a little bit higher than from the design-based approach. But then when we move over into the spatial model, we can see that the uncertainty is a little bit lower compared to the model-assisted approach that we have here. And then we can move on and we can look at the purple region. We can see that the more important number here is this actual standard error. So we see we have a standard error of 7.1. We can see that null spatial model is producing that error term that's, again, just a little bit higher than the design-based approach. And then we can see that bringing in that CCI map does bring down the uncertainty a little bit, but not I would argue not in a very substantial way. The only reason I don't have a model-assisted number here is because I didn't have time to get it calculated. And that's for the purple, green, and orange ones too. So we can see that as we reduce the number of plots though in the area, so we're going down to 32 plots from using much larger numbers of plots. So we see that in the design-based approach we're at 16, but then we can see when we can bring in that spatial model, we can bring in that map data, we actually do reduce the error quite substantially. So we're getting down from 16 to 10. It's also nice to see that the null spatial model uncertainty is coming out similarly to the design-based approach. And then the same thing happens in the orange section. So for the pink region, where we don't have any plots at all, we actually can't calculate a design-based or model-assisted estimate. So the only choice we have in the pink region is to go into this model-based approach. So for the null spatial model, which is what I'm arguing is similar to the design-based approach because they're both not using any additional data other than the field data around it. We can see that the uncertainty is quite high, which it makes sense. We don't have any field plot data actually within the region to help us get that estimate. And then you can see that when we bring in the CCI biomass map, we do bring that uncertainty down a little bit, but it's still quite high. Yeah, so that's kind of the comparison between the approaches. We can quickly go to some concluding remarks. So we can see that we kind of showed here that the model-assisted and the geostatistical model, those estimators can improve forest biomass estimation by bringing in these remote sensing map products. Both approaches can be used to produce useful estimates of uncertainty, so we can interpret these numbers and produce confidence and credible intervals around them. And then we saw that both approaches can lower inventory costs. Well, I didn't quite show this, but you can speculate that that these approaches can be used to potentially lower inventory costs by essentially reducing the number of plots needed to reach whatever target error estimate we're looking for. And then we can also see that the spatial model based approach doesn't require plots within an area of interest to generate estimates with uncertainty, which becomes quite valuable in areas where we need estimates, but we don't have the time or money to go in and actually put field plot data in there, but we have data all around it that can tell us about what's going on, and we can bring that remote sensing data in. All right, am I out of time yet? Is that
We are slightly over the schedule, but if you have something small, a few more slides, then please go ahead.
Sweet. I'm just going to show you this one thing. I'm completely done with the talk, but I did want to bring up. This is the these are predictions essentially that we're looking at from using a spatial model-based approach. So it's another benefit that I see with moving over into the spatial modeling framework. So what we have here is a map for, so this is the west side of the United States. So we have Washington, Oregon, and the state of California. And what you're looking at is the predicted, essentially our best predictions at each pixel based on the spatial model. And but behind the scenes, we actually have access to the uncertainty underlying this map. And we have access to the uncertainty in a way that we can actually generate estimates for areas. So I'm going to go ahead and click a little mouse around here. It's better when the areas are a little smaller. But let's imagine that we needed to figure out how much forest carbon was in this particular triangle. So we can draw a line around that triangle and then just hit generate data over here. And it's going to take a second, but not all that long. And it's going to generate an estimate with error for carbon density within the triangle. So it's probably hard to see, but you can see this. So this green area, we call that the posterior predictive distribution of forest carbon within this triangle. That's just some fancy words because we're fitting this in a Bayesian paradigm of inference, so we kind of have to use more uncomfortable words, usually compared to the frequentist words that sometimes we get to use. But generally we have an estimate of 123 megagrams per hectare, and then we get a credible interval around that. That's these other dashed lines here. And then we can actually take the standard deviation of this distribution to be able to get a number that's similar to a standard error that we would get from a design-based approach. But yeah, it's pretty cool, and it kind of works dynamically. You can go in and draw new boxes and get estimates for lots of different areas. But yeah, just quick wanted to kind of highlight that additional benefit, I think, of moving over into a spatial model. But yeah, and with that, I think I'll hand it over to the next presenter and answer any questions that show up in the chat.
Thanks. Thanks, Chad. And you will see that there's quite a few questions in the chat. But yes, thanks for providing the overview, and also the what is the start of comparison within a tropical country context, which is very much needed. To wrap up the presentation part of this exchange, I would like to introduce Gael Sola, who is also based at FAO and will be presenting on mocaredd, which is a recently developed tool for Monte Carlo simulations for uncertainty quantification. Gael, the floor is yours.
Gael Sola, I'm consultant for FAO. Let me share the screen. Fire the presentation. Yes, and I will talk about mocaredd. And mocaredd is short for Monte Carlo simulation for RED plus uncertainty analysis. Okay, just checking everything is in place. And so I'm a consultant for FAO. Counting and uncertainty analysis of country support on RED plus carbon accounting. I have been confronted to a lot of very complicated Excel spreadsheets that are commonly used for reporting uncertainty, and yes, and with all of the difficulty we had to handle this complicated spreadsheet, we decided with a small team at FAO to try to find some solutions to make the process a little bit easier for running the uncertainties when they're based on simulations and to report them and to verify them. So here I will present a little bit of context, and then I will present the context around the tool, and then I will do a quick demo of the tool. And the context, maybe just to remind if you already know, but first when we want to report emission remove the tier 1 approach in IPCC uncertainty, or to estimate uncertainty and combine them. And I think many countries and jurisdictions have been using this formula so far because they were either lacking capacity on simulations or because it was a little bit more simple to use these equations here. However, in the IPCC guideline, it was made also very clear that this approach 1 has limitations, and especially because it only allows for full correlation or independency between the variables. And for RED+ reporting, that's a bit where we are. So we should actually move to simulation, Monte Carlo simulation, which is the tier 2 approach in the IPCC guidelines, and which is also what high integrity standards are now requiring more and more. So you have here, it's a quote from the FCPF guidance on the use of Monte Carlo based uncertainty that requires the use of Monte Carlo simulations for the uncertainty. I have another one here from the TREE standard that specifies also that you should use 90% confidence interval and to use 10,000 simulations for all of the sources of uncertainty. So with that in mind, moving on to the challenges, what is now happening is that because the capacities are in place, both in countries and in reviewer, like Excel or Google Sheets or others. And this creates some complication because this Excel workbook are very hard to understand for anybody but the developers. The computation times becomes very slow when we start to add sources of uncertainty, and the randomization is not. These tools are just not designed for generating a lot of random numbers. And there might be some license barrier with Excel or with plugin for Excel. And not speaking about the chances of mistake that every time someone opens the workbook, because there are so many rows and columns inside these workbooks, it can be very easy to make mistakes, to make typos, and then it can be very hard to find them later on in the process. So we try to find a way to avoid using the spreadsheet, but still relying on the strength of it, which to me is the fact that spreadsheets are very good for templating because it's easy to fill in and it's easy to see what you are doing while you're working with spreadsheets. So we developed a tool that is combining a spreadsheet for templating so that you can enter initially data into the template, and we try to organize it in a structured way by setting some customization options and then specifying time periods and land use change areas with the uncertainty and then the carbon elements. But for the processing, rather than to add columns into Excel tables, we move to processing with R, statistical language. And I think the idea is that the countries or who want to generate uncertainty can focus on laying out the sources of uncertainty, and then we can let some statistical scripts run the simulations and give you the results. And yes, and it's free, it's open source. It can be run locally on your computer, or it can be processed on the cloud. So that's the idea behind the tool. And now the tool is ready to use. I think we have a small demo at the GFOI plenary in Bali, but now it's there, it's working, and you can start to use it. So I have some slides here, but maybe I can run a demo. I will just go maybe for a few more slides on the template because I had some notation here. So the template it has 4 tables. The first one is the options that allows us then with the code to adapt to as many different possibilities as possible. I will show it later, but now maybe the first table that is important for the data is just to specify the time periods of reporting the data. And we prepare the template this way so it allows you to specify different time period for the same monitoring period type. So for example, in this case here, there's 4 time periods. One is the time period for the reference level, 2005 to 2014. There was another 1-year time period that was one monitoring that the reports is for this time period is considered the first monitoring period. And then the second monitoring period is the combination of the time period 3 and 4, which is each of them is also 1 year. So by filling in the table this way, it allows for grouping different time period into reference or monitoring and have a dedicated report later on. Then the activity data. Here what is important is to have the same time period that you laid out before, and then to explain the initial and final end uses, the area and the standard error, and the type of probability distribution function that you want for the simulations. So here in this case, you can see that this is for first time period, second time period. In each case, they consider 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different changes here, which is deforestation in each case, right? Because we move from open forest to post-deforestation in open forest. And so once you have entered all of the different land use changes, then the last template tab is the carbon elements. And the carbon elements, you have to re-put the same land use code that you have for initial and final land use changes, and then the carbon element that you are reporting, and then you can specify also the value, the standard error, and the probability distribution function. Okay, so how, let me see, this is the screenshot in case the tool doesn't work, but it should work. So I go straight to the resources, and here you can run the app in this URL, and you will have, maybe I'll put in the chat after I finish speaking, but we also share the presentation. We have a documentation here also on how to install if you want to run locally, and some explanations about how to use the template, for example, how to develop the template, and some forms to contact us. If you want to work with the tool and you have some questions, then you can use this form. All right, so switching to the tool is here. Up, and I will go straight to the tool itself. And so it works in 3 main steps. The first step is to upload the data, then you run the simulations, and then the sensitivity analysis. Sensitivity analysis component will be developed first quarter of next year. Now I just want to show you how it works. You can download the template here, and once you do it, you will have an Excel file. It's like this, which has the user input, the time period, the activity data, and the carbon stock I just showed in a slide just before. So you can download and you can edit it the way as you see fit for your own case. And once you're ready, you can browse and put the template back in the tool. So it's uploading the tool, and then immediately checked if the tabs, you have the 4 tabs that we need for the template to run. And then you can click run checks. it will run some check, but it's too fast to show the steps, but anyway. And you will have initially some initial informations about the data that you have entered in. So this is the example that I was showing in the presentation. So you have 4 reporting periods, 1 for reference and 3 for monitoring. In total, in this workbook, there were 48 land use changes reported between 6 land use categories and 2 REDD+ activities, deforestation and forest degradation. And in terms of carbon stock, there were 4 carbon pools, above ground biomass, below ground biomass, dead wood, and litter. And here the degradation is a ratio applied to all of the pools except the litter. So this also thing that you can set up in the template that then the tool will understand and be able to process the simulation and aggregate the results. Immediately also the arithmetic mean is calculated for the different time periods, so that you have also a reference when you will see the result of the simulations. This is the checks. So if in the template there were some typos or errors in codes or numbers that places that are supposed to be numbers but are not, so you will receive okay, some tips or some indication of where the problem lies and on which part of the template. So it's also a way to help you fill in template and knowing where there can be errors and how to solve them. Okay, we also added here the land use change matrices in hectare, just to have a quick idea of where the deforestation and degradation are occurring, and you can compare the different time periods here. For example, we can see that closed most evergreen forest in 2005. Then in 2014, it was reduced by 1,200 hectares, and then you can change to the different time period to see how it evolves. Okay, and so once you're ready, then you click Run the simulations, and that's where all of the simulations are run, and then the data are aggregated. Calculated emission reduction is when we aggregate the simulations then to get to the totals. Here, and you will get immediately the forest plot that show you for your different time period in ton of CO2 per year, the arithmetic mean that we saw in the previous tab, the result of the simulations here, which is the median of the simulations, and the uncertainty percentage, and the lower and upper bound of the confidence interval. And you have them also presented here as a median and the range of the confidence interval here. So you can see for the reference period, the emissions and the emission reductions. And you will also have the histogram to also have an idea of the curve, and which is relatively normal at first, but as we combine them, we can sometimes deviate from, here still okay, we can sometimes deviate from like normal distribution in the aggregated simulations. That's it. And then here you have details for all the time period and the REDD+ activities, which is the first step to then understand the different contribution of the different time period activities. And then in the next step, we will also add activity data versus emission factors, so you can understand where the uncertainty is coming from. That's it. And then finally also, because it's good to have the aggregated result, but you can also download all of the simulations, so that, for example, for transparency, for example, you can download all of the land use transition simulation, for example, here. If I'm allowed, because I don't see it. So I don't, because of the taskbar of the Zoom. It's here, but it's quite big. It's gonna take a while, and it's done. Here, but in this case, it was 10,000 simulations. So with 48 land use transitions. So that's going to be a very big table. And there it is. And you can see that at the land use change level, so we have for each simulation, so each row is a different simulation. And then we have from the aggregated to the disaggregated all of the value. So this is the emission value, for example, for the first simulation. And it's the product of the activity data and the emission factor here. The emission factor is itself the difference between the initial and the final carbon stock. And here we also specify how the initial carbon stock was calculated from the carbon pools. So here we have the sum of 4 pools, which are here. And so this is this is simulated. And then all of this here is calculated based on the content of the table. The script recognizes the carbon accounting chain and can perform the aggregation at the simulation level and then generate the statistics. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. Where's my presentation? Here. So I bring back the resources. The tool is ready. Maybe a small disclaimer. Right now, we have only coded for emissions, so deforestation, forest degradation, but we still need to add later another tab for the annual processes and then include the removals. But so you have the app here, you have documentation here that includes how to install locally, if you prefer to install it locally, and a way to contact us, and then I'm good. Thank you very much, and back to you, Daniela.
Thank you, Gael, and thanks for this very interesting tool and the overview of how to use it. Yeah, congratulations on having a demo online that actually worked as you were showing it. So that's always really good to see. You will see that in the Q&A that there has been some questions that have already been ongoing, and Javier has been doing his best trying to answer them, but please have a look. And so with Gael's presentation, we end the round of presentations within this R&D exchange. So now we will enter the Q&A session in which we will be answering your questions in which the presenters will be answering your questions. So I invite all presenters to turn on your cameras and so that we can engage in some questions, and also for the audience to start, to continue using the Q&A chat as you have been doing before. Perhaps I will start with a question about the last presentation. So Gael, there's a question by Mohammed Qasim. I hope that I pronounced it correctly, about a user guide for this mocaredd tool.
Yes, so in the documentation online, we have a tutorial on how to fill the template. So we explain each column, what kind of data is expected in each column of the template. And then there is also a link to download some templates. So the one I've showed is, I would say, intermediate, because it has four carbon pool. It has a lot of transitions, but we have also a more simple one, maybe for starting with only AGB, only 2 time periods, and very few land use changes. So yes, I would direct you to the documentation. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. And maybe if I can follow up on that question, I was looking at the Q&A and also seeing your presentation, Gael, about the future updates of this tool. I understand that this is a tool that is relatively new. I mean, you're only launching it and looking for feedback from teams that will be trying it out. But can you summarize briefly what the next steps are for the tool in terms of updates?
Yeah, sure. So the immediate update will be the sensitivity analysis, and then more or less at the same time we'll also have translation for it. So now it's in English, but I already have the architecture to add French and Spanish to it. So we will have in the 3 languages, and then it will be easy to add other languages as well. The architecture is in place. And then in terms of, let's say, medium-term development, I think at some point we'll try to move into Bootstrap, but it's going to be a little bit more complicated because then it will require raw data or like lower level data as input. So I'm not sure yet how we can create like a structured template for raw data that would be then easy to plug in scripts on top of them. Yeah.
And of course, as Gael was mentioning before, we are planning to incorporate a slow oxidation process or slow gain processes, because right now all the processes are rapid oxidation. So all these processes that have an annual compound interest in, we still need to develop them. And then someone formulated a question about the use of a truncated normal versus a gamma. We are, yeah, I mean, we are gonna, we are gonna update with more PDFs, basically, with more available probability density functions. Yeah.
Yes. And also I think that's where it's a strength to combine the template in spreadsheet and the processing in R, because it has a lot of support for all of these distributions.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. I would like to work. There is one question that just came by Christoph Klein. This is a question directed to all presenters. We are also good in the technical field of quantifying, estimating, and simulating errors and uncertainties and their propagation. But Christoph would like to hear more about the communication and reporting aspect of these uncertainties, and how this is received by decision makers or other, basically decision makers, or in reports that basically that give explicitly admit that there are so many sources of uncertainties. So this is more of a practitioner's question, but I would like to open the floor for all presenters to answer this. Javier, I think your mic is muted.
Sorry, I was gonna propose, Robert, but I'm gonna mention something. Christoph, this is something that we should discuss together. But I know that this is something that is really deep in your heart. I don't know if you are still there, but yeah, this is a difficult one, no? Because neither us nor even the people in the governments, they have direct input sometimes from us how the decision makers actually perceive these elements of accumulated uncertainty. We are assuming that many countries are not reporting many uncertainties because potentially, in principle, it is not beneficial, or there is this simple appreciation that the higher uncertainty, the less beneficial it is for you. But this is just an assumption. We don't really know what's going on. So yeah.
I can take a stab, and that's, I mean, an excellent question. I can't speak to how policymakers receive this, right? But I certainly can speak to some of the motivation, actually, why we came up with that paper. Even if we don't look at the policymakers, even if we just stay within those of us generating these predictions, these claims, we have situations already, they're ubiquitous now, where multiple different research groups produce the same kind of map. And some of them even produce maps with explicit uncertainties, and they don't agree. And so already what what you're speaking to at a certain level, as I understand it, is about sort of norms of interpretation and trust. And so in the case of the research products, if they're three different things claiming the same thing, they give a different answer, they have different uncertainties, it's pretty rational for a user to say, I don't believe any of them because you guys don't have your act together. So I think that really as more and more of these products coexist, we're going to be forced to be more honest about the uncertainties, which usually means it's going to look a little worse, but we have to sort of that has to be a process that we all go through of sort of acknowledging that and then trying to communicate that honestly to the users. It's not just policymakers, it's the people paying for carbon credits, all the rest of that. Like this is a challenging undertaking. And if we give a rosy picture of uncertainty at the beginning, it's going to become apparent at some point that that was wrong. And then the entire operation becomes untrusted, and we don't want that. I feel like we're trying to start an education process within our own community, but it does have to sort of emanate out.
I think that Daniela, Christo was asking in the chat whether is it possible that he can
Yes,
make a comment?
I have just unmuted Christoph, so you should be able to speak now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I have no idea whether I can also switch on my camera, because then you would see that I'm in the Caribbean at the moment. But let me briefly make two comments about my comment, because so I'm a little bit advanced in age, close to 100, I would say. And more I come to the idea that we should much more closely collaborate when we are talking about national forest monitoring with forest policy experts. And would have been great to have a forest politics expert talking here about how they receive our numbers. We always believe that when we present something, this will speak for itself. It doesn't. And we had a PhD thesis, Javier, you know the citation that I'm giving now, and the candidate interviewed people in the European Commission, and one guy explicitly said, if you wish to have your message come to the decision maker, do not talk too much about data quality. Better not to talk about uncertainties, otherwise you will lose credibility. And that was a citation of someone in the European Commission who agreed to be cited in a doctoral thesis with this statement. And this is something that we should have in mind. We are so good in all the technical things of quantifying uncertainties, but we are usually natural scientists, statisticians, remote sensing people, and we love, but not so much with people. And maybe that is what I just wanted to explain in some own words. Okay, thank you.
That's awesome. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think I'm on board with you, Christoph, but I do want to take a chance to at least give a take on you had a question for me on the diversity of possible results for my several different estimators I threw at everyone, which I think relates to your general comment too. But I didn't show them in the presentation, but I do think that showing confidence intervals or uncertainty intervals in some way across the different approaches can help with communication at least a little bit. So, I show those different, standard deviations and standard errors on there, but really being able to see the envelopes and show how those confidence intervals actually overlap, kind of indicating that like you can't really argue very much that the 4 different estimates that I presented are really all that different. The fact that they overlap, but we're seeing that some intervals might be slightly narrower, like I think can help be a good visual for being able to communicate how to interpret these numbers. And I think showing the error bar also shows, hopefully, would be great if it showed to policymakers or decision makers, like the fact that like the number that they're getting can't be considered like the truth. Like we can give them we give them the information saying we know the numbers somewhere between these two values, and we know it exists in that space, and that's as good as we can get. And being able to just come up with a way to better communicate that to people who aren't statisticians, I think, is a real challenge for us. But
Thanks, Thanks, Chad and Christoph, Robert, Javier, Gael. If there's anybody in the participant list that self-identifies as a policy or a decision maker and would like to speak up and reply to the discussion that we're having now, then by all means, please comment in the chat, and I will be very happy to turn on your mic. And while I leave the attendees to think about that question, I would also like to move on with a couple of questions directed at Chad and in relation to your presentation. There's a couple of questions, one related to since ESA's CCI biomass layer is having coarse resolution, 100 meters, was its uncertainty also included in the processes you described? And then a second question, which is not there anymore, so I guess you already answered, but maybe you can briefly comment on this.
Yeah. So concerning the essentially the uncertainty in the actual biomass product that is put out. So like there is we can't consider like the biomass value coming from the CCI pixel directly as the truth, and that's definitely true. I guess the way that these particular approaches kind of handle that is that essentially the error within the biomass map will be reflected in essentially in the lack of fit of the model that we use to I guess create the model assisted estimator or do the geostatistical model approach. So because we're regarding the Y values, so the actual plot values as the truth in those sorts of estimators, any sort of departure between the CCI biomass map and the quote unquote true value from the plot, like that's where we're trying to capture the error within the CCI map. And that all kind of falls out through the design-based estimators or the model-assisted or the model-based approach that we were using. So in short, I'm not taking any standard errors at a pixel level that are provided by the European Space Agency and then trying to carry that through the model. I am effectively, assessing error in how it relates to the field plot data we're using to generate the estimate.
Thanks, Chad, for your answer. Let me share my screen. And so I see that there's still quite a few questions and comments in the Q&A chat, which is great. Also in the chat, there's quite a lot of interest in the mocaredd tool, Gael. So I think you will have some busy times ahead. I would like to close this Q&A session, but also not even close, but redirect some questions back to you. So we have prepared a second set of interactive questions. So let me just share my slides. And you should be able to see a different QR code than initially. And also a different code that you can put on slido.com. And I will already start with the first question. This question is especially geared towards national forest monitoring teams, but everybody can answer it. In your experience, what is the biggest barrier to addressing uncertainty in national forest monitoring systems? Is it lack of data? Is it limited technical capacity, lack of clear guidance or methods? Also, like we've discussed, communication challenges with policymakers or funding bodies or other. And if it's other, please feel free to comment in the chat or in the Q&A box what you think it is. Great. So there's quite a range of different barriers that are already mentioned. There are, of course, there's technical capacity is going at, like the majority has answered limited technical capacity as the biggest barrier, but it's closely followed by lack of clear guidance or methods. There's also the communication challenges that we have discussed earlier during this exchange, and of course, lack of data and limited resources of time. I will move to the next question, which is more looking into the research aspect of this topic and the reason why we are also holding this event today, to explore a little bit what research attention we should direct our time to. So the options are, the question is, what area of uncertainty quantification requires the most R&D attention to support national level reporting? So it looks like most of you support, well, there's, we have 17 answers, but there's the one that is in first place is integrating remote sensing with ground data uncertainties. So that's also something that we touched upon today. And I hope that we can continue, or that Chad and Javier and the whole uncertainty, forest monitoring uncertainty community can keep working on this. Of course, working on guidance is something that is also within the activities that the GFOI does. Then there's also the development of user-friendly software or best practices for communicating uncertainty. And of course, there's many efforts that can help us collectively move forward. And the last question is related to these R&D exchanges. What topics would you want for us to discuss in upcoming R&D exchanges? So the topics that we have already covered in the last year have ranged from forest disturbance alerts to tropical wetland monitoring and also to forest degradation monitoring. However, there are we are generally interested to hear about what topics you would like to hear from us, and also what topics you would like to also share with the GFOI community. If you would be interested in sharing your experiences carrying out pre-operational efforts that integrate new methods or new data sets into your forest monitoring efforts. So right now I can see in the screen that there's already quite a few answers: geographical bias for ground data availability for models, agroforestry mapping, integration of ground and space data, also forest degradation, how policy makers deals with errors and uncertainty in forest monitoring results, stemming from the discussions that we're having today. Carbon measures with LiDAR. There is, of course, several of these topics will, I hope, also be included in upcoming R&D exchanges. So we will take a note of these answers and also see how we can how we can design upcoming exchanges. And of course, like I mentioned at the beginning of this session, if you are interested in taking part, please get in touch with the GFOI office, and we will be happy to see how to best design a session together. So this was the last question, and I think, Javier, there is still some time for you to share some of the preliminary feedback that you compiled from this session. So Javier and Chad, please, the floor is yours. Just let me know. I can switch slides.
Sure. Yeah. I think the Slido poll already was pointing out a little bit in that direction, but we took, when you registered, you had to add up a cell providing comments, and we took those comments, and then we tried to make sense of what were you expecting from a session like this one, and probably we assumed that it was what you would like to see in the future. So please take it with a pinch of salt, but these are the results of the registration, what happened in the preliminary feedback. So please go ahead. Basically we try to summarize a little bit in different 5 topics, let's say, all the comments that were open. So it was relatively even, the number of people interested in different things. There were Monte Carlo and tools associated to error propagation. There were elements about uncertainties for emission factors, above-ground biomass, remote sensing. There were uncertainties in activity data and sampling related to activity data. More general elements of reporting and MRV, and then very much more general interest sort of questions on uncertainties, probably a little bit more related to what I pinpointed in my presentation a little bit. So please go ahead. So basically we try to cover more or less some of these points in the 4 presentations that we make today. We try to cover a little bit the different points according to the different interests that people showed initially. So more or less we have been covering many of these comments, but of course there are a lot of elements that have been coming individually. And so you go to the third slide, the next slide. So overall, I think I try to summarize a little bit the comments. So people were particularly interested in anything related to map-based uncertainty quantification workflows. People were asking for standardized Monte Carlo workflows and the developing of tool ecosystems, what they call tool ecosystems for Monte Carlo. There is still serious interest for a guidance for uncertainty in forest degradation. I remind you that there was the last R&D exchange was on forest degradation. Robert was there and Marike, and but there is still guidance needed. I mean, it's still a hot topic. Sampling design optimization, and bear in mind the uncertainty behind it, or the interaction between sampling design optimization and uncertainty. Harmonizing national versus project level uncertainties. This is a topic that I had not thought much about it, but it looks like a very interesting one to me, particularly in the current situation where many countries face elements such as nesting, for example, nesting issues. Communication materials for decision makers. That's a little bit related to what Christoph probably was mentioning, a little bit related to what Robert was pinpointing to. And then finally, a bit of land representation uncertainty, which I wasn't sure exactly what he meant, but I assume it's sort of related to the map-based, to the first point, map-based uncertainty quantification workflows. So yeah, we're trying to pick up these elements to see what could be priority areas in the future for this particular topic, the topic on uncertainties. So that's all. Thank you very much. Daniela, back to you. Yeah, that's it. Daniela?
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. But yes, indeed, with this presentation, Javier, Chad, if you have something to say, please unmute yourself. I cannot see you since I'm sharing a screen.
Oh, I'm here. Yeah. So concerning concluding remarks. So thanks everybody for attending, and thanks for all the questions that we received. This is great for being able to kind of inform how Javier and I are gonna kind of take the uncertainty working group that we have and kind of push that forward and be able to provide future exchanges that can help address some of the questions that were coming up today for sure. It kind of sounds like we might need to do a little workshop and might have to get dirty with some code. It sounds like so I was getting some questions about trying to provide examples of like how to actually run the estimators that I was showing in particular. So maybe an interesting future workshop is trying to go through and get hands-on with some data and show that. So, but yeah, overall, great talk. Thanks to all the speakers for giving us some great presentations, and yeah, thanks for all the discussion and the attendance.
Thank you. Thank you, Chad, and also thank you, Javier, for for organizing this and thinking through the presentations and what was going to be shared, and also big thank you to Robert and Gael for your presentations. And also thanks to the audience participants for being so engaging in the discussions, and also for the participating in the Q&A chat. This is really helpful for us. And I hope that this event was also helpful for you. Just a final note is that the slides and the recordings will be made available soon in the coming days. And if you are interested in presenting your experience, please contact the GFOI office at gfoi-office@fao.org. And with that, I would like to close the webinar. Also, a big thank you to Madison, who has been handling the communication component. She has been the one sending the emails and the reminders. So we would not, you probably would not have heard of this event if it were not for her. So thanks, Madison, and thank you, everyone.